I'm going to start with the directionality of the head. I'm going to keep it really light because I'm going to be drawing that foreshortened arm over it. So this is a good question on how to draw foreshortening. Best way to think about it is you're just drawing a combination of shapes. So imagine if you were to stack just a Pringles can on top of a can of Lysol, and then you were to stand slightly above it. So one way to think about it is to just take these cylinders. Could you draw a Pringles can from the top view and then put another can on top of it, and let's say they were made of something transparent? Would you have a hard time drawing this? So you just reduce it to its most simple shapes. I mean, another way to think about it is also just forget that it's a foreshortened arm. Forget that it's something difficult to draw, and just let yourself just draw shapes. That's it. And it'll come together all on its own. It probably won't look right till I get the rest of this drawing in though, so let's do that. We're gonna plan the most basic shape in order to capture what's going on with the upper body. Just thinking about getting these energetic directional strokes here. Okay, once again, when I talked about how the best way to capture anatomy, the best way to learn anatomy, is to just draw overlapping parts of the body. Just by overlapping this with this, I mean, you can see it on the photo reference, where this comes in like this, comes up, back out. Really what we're describing is the rib cage pushing out. And if you just draw the overlapping forms correctly, then it'll start to come to life. Same thing here, we've got this line that just comes down here, right? Then it curves in right here. Then we're gonna bring this up here. We've got this big shadow coming up here, just like that. And look what's starting to happen. We're starting to see the shape of this rib cage just come to life. Okay, let's keep this directionality pushing down in this direction here. And I want to ask myself, how far out is this pelvis going to go? Let's get the pelvis placed in really, really basically before we go too far with this. So I'm going to put the inside of the pelvis here, and all I'm doing is using a plumb line where I'm lining up parts of the drawing on these basically imaginary vertical lines. That's what a basic plumb line is. So here we've got this, what I know to be the external oblique or the flank pad muscle coming out, but we're just drawing forms, overlapping forms. And if we do that correctly, then the anatomy will come out all on its own. So here's this side of the pelvis. The other thing I'm observing, the angular relationship to the two front bones on the pelvis. These front bones are called the anterior superior iliac spine, but not everybody needs to learn that. Really, it's just these two bony parts on the front of your hips. How do these line up? Getting that directionality is hugely helpful here. Okay, so now we have the basic directionality planned here, right? So now I can allow this to pull in as it stretches, and it's going to stretch back out over the back of the rib cage here. Okay, we can bring this down. And the good thing about clothed figure drawing is sometimes just getting the clothes drawn in correctly will teach you all about the anatomy underneath. So, all right, so we have the basic shapes for the upper body planned here. Now we're gonna get these legs in. And these are some awkward. This is kind of an awkward stance. You've got the knees pointing in. You've got both feet pointing in. Ooh, can you guys see the bottom of his foot? I'm gonna see if I can get that visible for you. There we go. Okay. So the first thing I want to know is, where do I place the legs? Which leg do you draw first? This is actually a really important question. What do y'all think? Which leg do you draw first? Why am I choosing this leg here? Well, my basic rule is when you are figure drawing, you want to capture the most important pieces of information first, because the most important pieces of information are the ones that really tell the story of the pose, the story of the moment. And if you don't capture that first, you'll never capture it. That has to come at the beginning of a drawing. That's why short gesture drawing is about the most important exercise you can do. Because it forces you to ignore the details and find that big picture. Okay, so this is the bottom of the knee here, making sure I remember which parts I'm measuring with which parts here. Same thing here. Okay, the anatomy of the knee. Massively complex part of the human anatomy to teach. But if you want to be able to draw correct and convincing anatomy without taking a ton of courses and buying books and things like that, just overlap correctly. So we've got this muscle here coming in, overlapping this form right here. Then you've got this piece behind it, right? Just overlap these forms correctly. Same thing here. We got this shadow showing us this overlap right here. And this is describing different muscle groups. This is describing a bone formation underneath this overlapping quad. Now here, I'm going to ignore the protrusion of the calf muscle and just get this crazy directionality here. And if I step back, it's starting to feel good, starting to feel correct. I don't want to go too far. I want to make sure I've made the leg long enough, actually. I'm going to remeasure this. So from here to here, it's the same as from here to here. So, okay, so this should be a little bit lower, actually. We're going to bring this here. We're going to bring this even lower. So just a quick double check. Not trusting your work and double checking is one of the best practices you can develop as an artist. And I'm not going to allow myself to get too bent out of shape about the anatomy here. Just thinking about what overlaps what. And if I overlap things correctly, the anatomy should start to come together all on its own. All right, here, I want to build the directionality, the angles first. Angular relationship between the two knees should give me the position. And look at this cylinder, it's not difficult. Just find those natural ellipses all through the body in order to build simple cylinders. And if you find the correct cylinders using simple ellipses, the anatomy should start to come out all by itself. Then you can adjust them. I want to make this a little thinner. I'm going to pull some of the width off this cylinder here as I step back and think, I don't think his upper cylinder here is that wide. Same thing here. First thing, directionality, and I'm going to include the foot here. And just get that direction planned. Simple cylinder. How far down is the cylinder going to go? I'm going to find it on this horizontal line. It goes to about here. This is where this cylinder is going to go. I'm not going to allow myself to overcomplicate this. And that's a big part of the artist's struggle, is we're always trying to make our life more difficult than it needs to be. I'm just finding these cylinders, that's it. And we can see this crazy difficult pose is starting to come to life. We're gonna have these fingers coming out up here. And in the name of simplifying everything, I'm just gonna create a single shape to describe all of the fingers. All right, I'm constantly stepping back, asking myself, is this how I want this to look? We've got this shoulder coming out. once again, anatomy, just overlapping simple shapes over simple shapes. And if we do it correctly, people will ask us, where did you study anatomy? That's amazing. You can tell them I studied with Johnny Draws. All right, I'm gonna just run outside real quick and make sure I don't have a parking ticket, so I will be right back. All right, so next. This is a pretty good start. I think we're getting all the major pieces in the right place. I'm wondering, once again here, I'm just creating a single shape for all the fingers on this hand. Wondering if this pelvis, I'm wondering if it's a little too wide, so I'm going to bring this in just a little bit. Just like that. And I always draw the correct line before removing the incorrect line, because I use the information about what's incorrect in order to find what's correct. So, all right, and this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it's coming out. Just because we've done the most difficult part of the entire drawing. Angles, that's it. Angles, and you're finding volume by reducing to simple shapes, and you are finding anatomy by overlapping simple shapes correctly. And that is honestly the hardest part of drawing. If you get all that correct, it'll look like you've taken all the best anatomy classes. I think I can push this out a little bit more. Once we have the major shapes in the right places, now we can begin modifying them. We're modifying them, first of all, we're thinking about being more precise with the volume of the shapes that we've made. Secondarily, we are going to think, we'll ask ourselves, do these shapes describe the anatomy of the subject? If they don't, what have I gotten wrong about the shapes? We're going to really resist slipping into thinking about, do these muscles look right? Got to resist that and just try to think about getting abstract shapes put in the right places. And I think this is the best way to begin approaching anatomy for the first time. So, welcome. If you've just jumped in, this is my very new and still unpopular Twitch channel, where I'm going to be basically teaching and demonstrating portraiture and figure drawing. My two favorite things to do. Okay, so I think we have another question. What do you think is more important, being able to draw from observation or a knowledge of anatomy? Observation, 100%, way more important. Knowledge of anatomy, there will come a time in your life when you need to study anatomy, but honestly, the most important thing you can do is learn to draw from observation. If you learn to do that, anatomy will be easy. I mean, there's still a lot of memorization to be done, but your drawings will look really good. Hello. Hey, Cocktail Banshees. Sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. Thank you. I appreciate that. Today's lesson is just all about how to draw anatomy if you haven't studied anatomy. And a basic summary is all we've done is we're just concentrating on observing a correct overlapping of shapes, and how if you overlap shapes correctly, the anatomy will begin to come out all on its own. So that's a basic summary. I do teach anatomy classes, but learning to draw from observation, way more important. And if you draw well from observation, it will look like you've studied anatomy. So Yeah, thanks for jumping into my stream. Now, another thing to start thinking about at this stage in the drawing is, if a bone is pressing up against the skin, I like to use sharper lines. Just because it describes the harder texture of a bone protruding out against the skin. Whereas down here, we've got the belly of this quadricep right here. And I like to soften that up because really, if you were to touch him there, softer, touch him there, you'd feel the ribs. And so can we draw in a way where people can begin to feel the surface texture in our subject? And that's really what we're doing when we're drawing. We're showing people something. And here we've got this muscle right here. What is it? Well, doesn't really matter if we draw it correctly, if we know the name or not. But it's the overlap that's so important. This is the anterior deltoid being overlapped by the tricep here, being overlapped by the elbow, and if we get all that overlap done correctly, then it should be amazing. Same thing down here. We've got the anterior deltoid coming down into pectoralis major, but that really, all it matters is we're observing the overlap. Let's soften this terminating line up a little bit. Bring this external oblique here, and the external oblique is resting on top of the anterior superior iliac crest, but you don't need to know that if you just observe that there is one shape here overlapping one shape here. So you can learn anatomy, or you can just learn to draw more convincing overlapping shapes based on observation. Same thing with the knee. Such a complex part of anatomy to draw. Just overlap stuff correctly. That's way easier than learning the anatomy of the knee. Welcome if you just jumped in to my stream. Thanks for joining. We're taking this simple cylinder and now we're going to begin adding some slight nuance to it. And just by noticing that this pushes back in here and back out here, we've inadvertently drawn two different muscle groups, right? We've got this quadricep group, which actually comes up here. And this is the adductor group. But if we just augment this cylinder to describe what we're seeing, there you go. Complex anatomy made simple, right? Simple overlapping shapes here. All right, we got a question. How would you simplify this if you had to do a 1-minute sketch? That's a fantastic question. I teach entire classes on that question. Okay, if I were to simplify this for a 1-minute sketch, I'll just show you down here what I would do. It's all about if you wanted to capture the anatomy correctly. I'm sorry, not the anatomy. If you wanted to capture the most important parts of this pose, it's not anatomy. It is the big picture. It's the story of the moment. It's the energy of the pose. If you get correct anatomy, but you don't get this energy, then you've missed all the most important stuff. So the first thing I'm thinking about in a 1-minute pose is the direction of his back, the direction of his head, and then what his legs are doing. See, this energy is already, from this pose, the energy is already starting to enter into the 1-minute drawing here. We've got the inside of his rib cage coming in. Look at the energy of the pose coming to life here. So in a 1-minute pose, I'm thinking about this weight-bearing leg. So much more important than a leg that's not bearing weight. Just because he could move this other leg around and it wouldn't change the pose that much, this leg right here. But imagine if he moved this leg an inch, the entire pose would change, right? So for the story of the pose, getting these action lines is just so important. And then finally, if you wanted to get this foreshortened arm in here, I might ignore the entire arm. Just get the shape right there. And then if you wanted to maybe bring it around, like that, and the story is coming out. So this is what I would do in a 1-minute sketch. I would focus on this. And if I had more time left over, I wouldn't worry about this arm over here. I mean, you could even just give it like, and that's it. But more so, I'd be thinking about the shape of these hips. So this is kind of more what I'm doing in a 1-minute pose. What do you think? Does that answer your question at all? It's a great question, by the way. Thanks for asking that. Exactly. Yeah, so, yeah, that's exactly it. So, the person who asked the question said it looks complete. That's what you want. You want to complete the story. You know, getting these shoulder muscles in here, not necessary for the story, for completing the pose. The directionality of the back, the hips protruding out here, which creates subsequent pinch right here. All of this is essential to the story. I'm thinking all about these angles, angular relationship here. Look at this over here too. You've got directionality taking a sudden change right here, creating this pinch. These are all the things we want to focus on in the short gestures. And by the way, the short gestures are the best way to improve at drawing. I could never do anything like this if I didn't practice at short gestures more than I do anything else. If you want your long drawings or your detailed drawings to get better, do short gestures. 1 minute gestures, 2 minute gestures. Which can be frustrating because if you're not good at gestures, then doing gestures are really, really frustrating. But I would advise you to just turn on your favorite music and have fun with it and realize it's going to take you a long time to get good at these, or get good at the short gestures. Cool, so I think this might be a good place to stop this one.